All right, so we're going to begin now. Thank you for attending today's Mastering MarketSight session for applying weight variables. Just as a heads up, this may be a briefer session today just because of the nature of weight variables and the things to discuss. There may not kind of be a lot of content here, so we are obviously open for questions, so feel free to ask any questions throughout the session and we'll try to address them at the end. And my name is Nick, and I'm a Customer Success Specialist for the MarketSight product. Okay, so what we're going to be reviewing today with regard to applying weight variables within the MarketSight platform is weight variable use cases, the different primary flows that you can go about applying a weight variable within the MarketSight platform, applying a weight variable by default so that any given crosstab and analysis that you create within the MarketSight platform will be applied by default, creating a weight variable within MarketSight, updating a weight variable, and then finally applying a weight variable manually within the Crosstab module, and just some analytic components to be aware of when using weight variables. So the first thing we want to go over is discussing weight variables within the MarketSight platform, as well as general use cases of using a weight variable. The general use case of using a weight variable would be in a circumstance where you do not feel like you have a representative sample from whatever your surveying methods were. So for example, let's say you had a circumstance where you surveyed 100 individuals, 20 of them ended up being men, and 80 of them ended up being females. But really, because you want a representative sample, you want to force that distribution to be something closer to 50-50. So there are some caveats to be aware of when you are going to be applying a weight variable. The first is it can be useful for scenarios like I just described, where you're trying to basically force the proportion to reflect your representative sample. But there is something to be aware of in that weight variables can have cons as well, because what you're essentially doing when applying a weight variable in that scenario is you are overinflating some of the smaller sample that you have. So in my example that I already gave, when you have 20 males and 80 females, because of the result of the weight variable being applied and kind of the proportion adjustment that occurs as a result of that, you're overinflating those 20 males to essentially be fully reflective of your entire sample. So just things to be aware of as you go about conducting your analyses and using weight variables. So the next thing we're going to discuss here is the two primary flows of which you could go about having a weight variable in your data set and ultimately kind of creating it within MarketSight. So the first flow is, like I just mentioned, if you have a weight variable contained within your data set already. Within this flow, you're basically using another tool or another platform to calculate this weight variable, and you're just looking to apply it within the MarketSight platform. If that's the circumstance that you have, then basically your weight variable should just show up on your variable list here. So in my case, if you assume that I just uploaded this data set from an SPSS file, let's say, your weight variable would actually just exist as a regular variable on your variables page. And then unless you choose to apply by default, it'll be up to you to manually apply it within a crosstab. The other flow would be using MarketSight to create a weight variable for you. So using the weighting button up here, I can basically follow the prompts to create a weight variable, and we can go over that in more detail later in the session. So if you do have a circumstance where your weight variable already exists in your data set and you anticipate that you're going to be applying it to every analysis that you plan to conduct within the MarketSight platform, you can actually select that weight variable as a default. The way I would do that is I would right-click my data set of interest, select Properties, and when my data set properties open here, I can select my Weight and Wave Variables tab. These top two drop-downs are going to be specifically of interest to you if you're going to apply a weight variable. So the first thing I would do is select the category where I know my weight variable exists. And then this second drop-down here, I'll have the ability to select the variables within that category. So since I've organized my data set, I basically have set it up so I only have this one weight variable in here. If you're going to do this upon initial upload and you don't categorize your data sets, basically your weight variable will exist in uncategorized here. So just something to be aware of. Once I'm all set, I just have to click OK. and that weight variable is now being applied by default. I can actually further verify this by coming to the variables page and right-clicking any given variable here. You'll notice that when I right-click, it'll actually tell me that population weight is being applied to the counts being displayed to me. So the next thing we're going to cover is ultimately creating a weight variable within the MarketSight platform, and some things to be aware of as you go about deciding to create a weight variable. To create a weight variable, all I need to do is select the weighting tab here. It's going to be opening the weighting dialog. I would need to come up with a name here. So in this case, I'm going to be using gender. I would set my name and code, and then I would select the variable or variables that I intend to create this weight variable off of. Because we use rim weighting as the methodology, you can actually drag over multiple variables and set your targets as desired. But for the sake of the demo, we're actually just going to use one variable just because it's a little simpler to explain and conceptualize. So something to be aware of here, when I drag over a variable, it's going to tell me the specific sample distribution of my current values here. So for example, my current sample is 67% male and about 33% female. All I need to do is I would need to set these targets such that they add up to 100%. As long as your targets add up to 100%, you should really have no issue creating this weight variable here. Something to be aware of when you're going through the process of creating a weight variable, or if you're encountering errors and issues, is that you cannot actually have blank values when creating a weight variable. So if no one answers this question, you're going to want some sort of missing or NA category to be captured here so that you can set the target to 0, and thus you can still handle your weighting needs while still kind of having those missing values within your data set. Down here, you can actually adjust tolerance and max iterations. So tolerance is basically the amount a weight adjustment can kind of get towards adjusting the actual count, and then max iterations is how many iterations you set to max at for the algorithm to converge. Because in a circumstance where you're using a lot of weight variables, you can end up, or a lot of variables I should say, you can end up in a scenario where the weight algorithm will keep running. So basically we allow you to set max iterations so that it just doesn't end up in an infinite loop. The final thing to note down here is this checkbox, set weight variable as default for the dataset. This has a similar function as kind of going to the properties of your dataset, in that once I create this weight variable, it will actually use this new gender 50/50 variable as my default. So it'll actually override the population weight that I just applied. So I'm going to click OK here. And once the weight variable has been finished, you'll actually get some basic metrics on that weight variable as well. So now we can move on to how you would go about updating a weight variable. So the scenario here is, let's say you take the time to append to your data sets, and you're kind of looking to now update that weight variable because now your distributions are different. MarketSight will not automatically update that weight variable for you, so it's going to be up to you to manually update. The process is pretty straightforward and very similar to creating a weight variable. All I would do is I would select weighting here. In the circumstance I'm describing now, I would actually just be updating an existing variable, so I'll just check that box here. And then from the drop-downs, I can basically select that variable. And I can drag over my new set now for whatever I want that weight to be and set those targets again. So the thing to keep in mind if you are going to do this process is that MarketSight does not retain the previous weighting schema that you applied. So if you are going to use this process, you're going to still want to document the weighting schema that you've created for the first time. All right. Okay, so now we're going to move on to applying weight variables in a crosstab and just some things to be aware of. Since I now have that gender weight being applied by default, when I create a new crosstab, it should actually automatically apply my weight variable. And this can be verified by clicking on the weighting tab here. And you can see that gender 50-50 is being applied. So now, let's test it out by dragging over some variables into rows and columns. And you can see here that I do have an even distribution of males and females. I can actually further validate this by simply unchecking to apply the weight value. And now you can see my original counts here. If your setup requires you to display the unweighted counts as well as the weighted counts, we can accommodate that as well. All you would do is you would select Options, Calculations, and the display calculation options that I have should also include those unweighted counts. And down here, I have the ability to basically apply this calculation set to all my variables. So now you can see my unweighted sample as well as my weighted sample. Something else to be aware of within the MarketSight platform is when you apply a weight variable in a crosstab, and maybe you forgot, or maybe you've created a series of crosstabs that apply weights and ones that do not, is there's a notation under your crosstab name that will indicate whether or not a weight variable is being applied. Something else to note is that within the MarketSight platform, you actually have the ability to apply weight variables to individual rows of your crosstab as well. So for example, if I select my household income variable here for my row, I select weighting, I actually have the ability to apply a different weight variable to only this row of the crosstab. So in my case, let's search for that population weight again. Down here, it's going to allow me to apply this set to other row variables, but for the sake of the demonstration, we're only going to apply it to the first one. So now I actually have a different weight being applied to my first row here. And you can actually see that reflected in the sample distributions here for the weighted and unweighted counts. If I scroll down, you can see those weighted distributions as well. The other thing to note is that when you apply weight variables individually to individual row variables, you'll get this kind of cross notation here as well. And then in the header, it'll also indicate that a different weight variable is being applied to that row. Something else to keep in mind when using weight variables is your stat testing. So if I come to the Statistics tab here, you'll see that I actually have 3 different options when it comes to statistical calculations and using a weight variable. Right off the bat, by default, we use weighted base. And this is, again, if a weight variable is being applied. If not, and weighted base is actually selected, it's just going to use your unweighted base counts. But essentially, weighted base is doing just that. So in the circumstance of a stat test, for your ends, it's going to be using that original weighted sample size for those calculations. Unweighted base is pretty straightforward, but again, you're going to be using your original unweighted counts. And then finally, we have this third option here, effective base. Effective base is actually useful for a scenario where you suspect that a significant proportion adjustment has occurred as a result of you applying your weight variable. So basically, effective base can better control for that proportion adjustment that occurs because it's a separate calculation to calculate this base. And again, when you have a circumstance where you have a dramatic proportion adjustment occur, you could also end up in a scenario where you're finding significance where it may not actually exist. So using effective base in that circumstance can kind of be better or more ideal than using kind of the original weighted base. Again, determining which one you want to select is really going to be dependent on whatever project you're currently working on and kind of the nature of the proportion adjustment that occurs as a result of applying the weight variable. Okay, so in terms of applying weight variables to a crosstab, that's about all I have to cover. If you do need additional resources and assistance for understanding more about the weighting basics of MarketSight, you can always refer to our help section, where we kind of give a little bit more detail about maybe the individual terms used within the weighting module, as well as a reminder of the steps needed to create a weight variable. And with that, I think that's about all I have to cover in terms of the actual creation and usage of weight variables. So we can open it up for any questions that anyone might have for the discussion here. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so the first question I see is there a minimum sample size for running weight variables in MarketSight? There is not a minimum sample size that you have to adhere to have a weight variable apply. The thing to just keep in mind is just that it is going to affect your accounts because it is going to adjust the proportions among different categories. The next question I see is, can you create tiered variables in MarketSight? So I'm assuming this might be weight variables with multiple layers. So we can create those weight variables with multiple variables contained within the weight variable itself. But if this question is kind of directed at if we can apply multiple weight variables to the same crosstab, we do not have that capability at this point in time. So this is actually something important to mention within the framework of this crosstab here. When I select a new weight variable to apply to a given row, it's not going to apply that weight variable simultaneously with the weight variable that's being applied to the entire crosstab. It's basically just going to overwrite the original and apply that new weight variable to just this row. Let's see here. So I think this question is kind of directed at if targets will adjust automatically so that it ultimately ends up adding up to 100% as you're slowly filling in targets. That is not how the module works. You'll actually need to fill in targets and just know that they'll add up to 100%. The next question we have here is, when you use the update weight feature, will that work if you need to add an additional weight variable? For example, if I had gender weights but now need to add age to the weight variable, can that be done, or do you need to create a new variable? So this is a good question. When using the update feature, you do have the ability to add additional variables to that weight variable, so you won't need to create a new one. You can simply overwrite basically the original. Can you see the weighting efficiency after creating the weight variable? You can, but that was actually the display that occurred immediately after creating the weight variable. But after it's been created, you can't actually get that dialog to show up again. So it is something that you're going to want to record basically when you create the weight variable. So if I look at my weight variable here, it doesn't actually show me weighting efficiency. But if I come here really quick, just do a quick one. Let's see here. And create. You can actually see the weighting efficiency upon the initial creation of that weight variable. All right. The next question we have here is, what is the easiest way to organize and locate your weight variables? So this is a pretty good question as well. Basically, the way I like to organize my data sets is I like to create a separate category using the categorize module here that basically will only contain my weight variables. And I can just actually add this additional gender weight variable to my weight category. And the benefit of this is it actually just makes it easier to organize your work overall. So if you do have a data set that contains multiple weight variables, for example, because you want to use different weight variables kind of depending on scenario, it'll make it a little easier to organize within the Crosstab module itself, because I'll have kind of a separate folder here that has my weight variables that I can ultimately apply to the Crosstab itself. And the final question I see here, is there any way to mark outputs as one that have used weight variables? So within the Crosstab module itself, if I apply a weight variable, as mentioned earlier, it'll display under the Crosstab title here. If you're looking kind of for additional information, so let's say, I'm on the Crosstab's list page, and I just want an easy way to identify whether or not a Crosstab contains a weight variable, my recommendation would definitely be just to add that information to the description field of your Crosstab, because once you add it to the description field here, it'll actually show up in the description of that Crosstab itself. All right, so I think with that, that is all the questions we have at this point. If you have any additional questions, you can obviously feel free to reach out to us. So we have some additional contacts here. You can always contact customer service or me directly, or you can always give us a call if you do have additional questions regarding weight variables. All right, thank you everyone for attending today's session, and have a nice day.